The JMF Advisors Show is a podcast for business owners, C-suite executives, and entrepreneurs who are looking to build, grow, or even exit a business.
We bring in some of our best financial advisors to interview experts on business best practices, hot topics, and sprinkle in some tax and accounting help.
If you're a business owner, startup founder, CFO, or just starting your side hustle, this podcast is for you. All right, welcome back to the JMF Advisors Show. We've got another segment with Rachel Taylor, who's a shareholder in our tax group at JamisonMoneyFarmer. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Thanks for spending a good chunk of time with us on these podcasts. You've been extremely insightful and valuable for all the tax planning needs.
Well, good. I hope so. It's been good.
You always deliver, good quality information, even for somebody like me to understand. So.
Okay. It's a ringing endorsement there.
Add that to your resume right there. Podcast guest that makes things complicated seem easy.
That's right. That's the goal.
Awesome. So today we're going to talk about getting prepared for tax season. I guess for people in our office, it seems like we're always preparing for tax season,
yes.
Or we're always in tax season. A couple of years ago, I think we were always in tax season.
Yes, for sure.
For our listeners that are either business owners or everybody's got to file their individual tax returns, it's basically a hassle one time a year kind of thing that it's really the only time you're thinking about it. So from a preparation standpoint, what are some things that individuals and business owners really can kind of start doing now to prepare for either that March 15th or April 15th deadline? To really get ahead of the curve, sort of.
Sure, yes. Preparing early is definitely key. And just finding a way to stay organized is the best idea. So as you get to the end of the year and into the beginning of the next year, and you start getting all that mail that's going to relate to your tax return, maybe you make year-end contributions or really contributions any time of the year, because some organizations will send you a letter at the end of the year that's an annual statement, or you're getting your W-2s and 1099s in the first couple months of the next year. Having a place to keep all that where you know where it is really helpful. So a designated shoebox, that's the cliche, can be helpful, because then, if you get something that looks important, open it up, look at it, put it in that box, that bag, that folder. And that way you'll know where all your stuff is, and you'll know, do I have all my stuff yet? I can look right here and see. So doing that. And then also if you think you might have gotten mail or had some kind of transactions throughout the year that you maybe didn't do that with, then the end of the year might be a good time to go back and review. I know I had these charitable contributions. I know I had this medical expense. I know I had this timber sale. I know I had, whatever it is. I'm going to go ahead now and get all those documents together. I renewed my car tags, paid my property taxes, all those things that maybe you got correspondence for or receipts for earlier in the year. Don't wait till March to go find those things. Go ahead and do that early so that it'll save you some stress later of trying to track it down.
So I have in my office at home, I have a drawer, not a box, but a drawer. And I literally keep a, manila folder or whatever with, this is my 2022 stuff, and I just slide it in there. Mm-hmm. And then, I'm now going to start on a 2023 folder, and, I just change the numbers each year. But generally speaking, I'll have two, for part of the year in there. Mm-hmm. So if I ever have any questions where that might have gone, that's where it'd have gone.
Makes it easier, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. And that allows you to get a jump on, if because you mentioned kind of that we're always preparing for tax season as CPAs and accountants. So, there tends to be it builds, the longer you go in tax season, obviously, the more work there is to do. And so we encourage people to get their information into us early, because it helps with our workflow, but it also helps just turn things around faster. So the more organized you are, obviously, the sooner you can get your stuff in.
Right. One other thing I wanted to go back to, you mentioned not just throwing them into a shoebox or whatever, but actually opening the mail prior to throwing them into whatever filing system you. So why is that important?
I think we all just have a tendency to look at an envelope. Sometimes it'll say important tax information right on the envelope. And so we say, great, I'm going to throw it in my folder.
Right.
And we don't look at it. And it probably is exactly what you think it is. It probably is that 1099. It is that W-2. But maybe there's something else in there that is important that you need to take care of. And also, it's just helpful to look at your statements, because if there's an error on it, we might not know that that's incorrect, but maybe your W-2 is not right, or maybe that 1099 is really preliminary, or sometimes they'll tell you, hey, here's your 1099, but we're going to send you a corrected one in 3 weeks. Well, that might be helpful for you to know, just so you can be on the lookout for that second one and you'll know what it is. So just knowing that might not just be exactly what you think it is. There may be more information in there. And that just also saves us the time of opening up all your mail. Right. It just cuts down on our time, which can translate to a lower bill for your tax return.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, I know we joke about that in our office.
Yeah.
Okay. They haven't looked at any of the.
Right. It's
here's the return that we gave you last year with all this new stuff. You didn't look at that.
That's right. Stuff. It happens.
So I guess we've talked a little bit about in another podcast about random tax planning strategies, not random, strategic.
Sure.
Tax planning strategies. Anything around charitable deductions or receipts for those, and you mentioned kind of staying on top of that.
And what I usually advise people to do, most people are kind of creatures of habit. We give to the same organizations every year. We might even give roughly the same amounts or the same frequency. So usually the charitable deductions are kind of easy to track down. You know where the receipts should be coming from. You might be able to look in your online banking and print a report, depending on what you use, that kind of thing. Medical deductions can be a little bit trickier because most of the time 1 year is not like the next. So what I usually advise people is, if you think you might have enough medical deductions to make it worth your time, which your tax professional should be able to tell you, unless you had at least $15,000, don't worry about it, that kind of thing. I wouldn't go trying to track down every $40 copay or whatever. But if yes, I had to buy this piece of medical equipment this year, or I had to stay in the hospital for 2 weeks, or I had this really expensive medication or something, kind of go for that low-hanging fruit, because you can drive yourself crazy trying to track down these little copays that may not add up to very much. Go for the bigger stuff. Right. And the same thing could be said for charitable contributions, I suppose. If you're the type that maybe you give $20 here and there and you just can't put your hands on those receipts, but you can put your hands on the big ones, don't beat yourself up about it, because you're not talking about a lot of dollars there mainly. Right.
Yep. And we've talked about medical receipts. How many, what is there you said 15,000. Is that the rule of thumb, or is it, do a lot of people do medical? I don't think I've ever done medical.
No, most people don't. You would have to have the right set of circumstances. Maybe your income is lower this year because of some big loss you had, or you lost a job, or, some kind of big change. Your income is lower because your medical deductions have to get over a threshold in order to be deductible. So it's 7.5% of AGI, maybe going up to 10%. I feel like that's happening. So that's a pretty big threshold. If you have $200,000 of adjusted gross income, that's $20,000, $15,000, you know what I mean?
Right.
And then beyond that, you would have to get over the standard deduction threshold. So maybe you could take your medical expenses based on your AGI threshold, but you can't get past that standard deduction threshold. So we see a lot of people with reoccurring medical expenses, like a nursing home or some kind of home health care, that kind of thing.
Right.
But it is possible to be outside of that that mold and also get to still deduct them. But you'd have to find the right set of circumstances, like my medical expenses are high and my income is low
Right.
or lower than normal,
So
that kind of thing.
I guess the fact pattern that matches that would be I wasn't able to work for half the year
For sure.
because of I was in the hospital or wherever for
Right.
6 months. So I racked up the expenses and didn't have the income.
Right.
That's the likely.
And so then if you don't really want to spend the time tracking down medical expenses, you could always ask the question first, do I need to do this?
Right.
Does this make sense? Or am I just digging through these bank statements for no reason kind
Right.
of thing?
Yeah,
It's a good question to ask.
Yeah, you don't want to hunt down things you don't really want.
Exactly.
Yeah. Any other, I know we talk a lot about documents and things of that nature. Any other document related things to consider?
One thing that we have to always ask people is about their driver's license information, which seems like it shouldn't fit into your tax return at all. But in Alabama and in a lot of other states, it is an e-file requirement, and it's an identity protection measure. So if you renewed your driver's license this year, then go ahead and give us your updated issue date and expiration date, because we will be asking for that if what we have in our records has expired. And same thing with your bank. Banks change names. Sometimes they change routing numbers. Sometimes they change account numbers, or maybe you just change banks.
Right.
If anything like that has changed and you use that bank account on your tax return for a direct deposit, maybe a direct debit, then make sure we have that information too. Because if it's a well-known bank change, we would catch it. If we know that you used to use this bank and now they've changed names, we would catch that. But if you just personally have changed banks, obviously we may or may not know that.
Right.
So that's good information just to go ahead and give us. Same thing if you had a major life event. You got married, you got divorced, you had a child, that kind of thing. That, those changes, that person's name, social security number, date of birth, that kind of thing, or whatever, any kind of life changes, we would need to know that. And,
Right.
And that's the kind of thing, obviously, we may already know, but just to include it in your information, just to have it documented is always really helpful.
Right. Okay. So I just got my license renewed. So,
Oh, good.
And I guess this is the year that they're going to require that STAR license. So a lot of people have been waiting for that STAR license. So to travel,
Right.
you're going to have to, you have to give them a little more information.
That's
So
true.
There may be a fair number of people this year that are updating their driver's license even though it's not expired.
And that's a good point. That could be. Yes. That's been delayed
Yeah.
several times, so it's finally coming around.
Yeah, I think 2023 travel is when it kicks off. So
Okay, so we may see that. That's good to remember.
yeah, here's also a tip. So if you go to the normal renewal and you want to go from a regular ID to a STAR ID, they won't let you do it. They'll let you renew it, but they won't tell you that you need it you can't do your STAR there.
Oh.
So you have to actually go to the trooper's office to do the STAR because they've got separate, check your passport. And
Right.
so you need a couple more things to get that STAR ID. So
I actually did that a few years ago, and I took a ton of information, and they really only used a little bit of it, but
Yeah.
I had it
Right.
just in case.
that's right. So I think everybody's got to get that updated driver's license this year.
I think you're right.
Unless you don't ever fly.
Right.
Sure.
Then you're in the clear.
All right. What other sort of we touched on a lot of topics related to preparing for your tax return, and any other things of note from your perspective?
Well, as I mentioned, we typically are creatures of habit. So we follow the same rhythms throughout the year as far as, we use this bank, we give to this place, we work at this place, that kind of thing. So we being the accountant side, we use last year's tax return as a guide to say, okay, here are all the documents that you had last year. So I'm going to compare what you gave me this year to that list.
Right.
And if anything's missing, I'm going to ask you about it. Even if I might think I know the answer, I just want to be sure that I'm not just assuming something that's incorrect. So that's something helpful for a taxpayer to do too, to say, okay, here's all the documents I had last year. Tax organizers can be really helpful for that, and we can generate those. So maybe I closed this bank account, so I don't have that 1099 anymore. So I'm just going to cross that off on the list. That just saves us from having to come back and ask you about it. Or, I bought a house, I sold a house, so maybe my mortgage interest statement is coming from a different place. And while we're talking about that, having copies of those settlement statements is really helpful. Sometimes there are items you can deduct. On the purchase of a home, a refinance,
Right.
that kind of thing. We saw a lot of refinances a couple years ago, or really over the last couple years, I guess, with their interest rates being low. So just thinking about what you had last year, or even looking at your return or at your tax organizer and just making notes helps us out.
Right.
Just to know, okay, you didn't include this document, but it's because you don't have that anymore, not because you just forgot to put it in or didn't have it yet.
Right.
So those kind of things are really helpful.
So our assumption is we would see the same K-1s
Right.
or interest receipts and things of that nature
Right.
year over year. So if an event happened during the year, you let us know.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, all those things are really helpful to us. And then getting your documents in early. I think I mentioned that already, but one additional bit of information is, I think we tend to think, we maybe as taxpayers and general folks, that, well, I need to wait until I have everything on this list before I take it into my accountant. And that's not really the case, because, we've all seen, different forms have different due dates. Your W-2 is supposed to be out by the end of January. Technically, so are your 1099s, but they always get extended out. So February 15th-ish is a common time for you to get those brokerage statements, those 1099s, but they can also come out after that. So if you've got maybe everything but this particular K-1 or everything but that consolidated 1099 from your investment account, it's still okay to go ahead and bring in everything else and maybe just put a note that I am waiting on this one item, because we can go ahead and get your return in process, because it may be that we have other questions or other missing items. And so if we can go ahead and get all of that figured out, and then when you do get that bit of missing information, we can wrap up your return quicker.
Right.
So that's something that can be helpful for our workflow, just to know what we've got coming in. And then also just for, for a taxpayer, just so they can get the ball rolling a little sooner, maybe get their tax return done a little sooner.
Right.
And also, I would say, to take advantage of electronic options that you have, we offer a lot of different ways you can submit your documents electronically and securely, because obviously that's a big deal. So you don't have to necessarily have paper. You could have an electronic copy and send it to us, and then you can keep your documents.
Right.
And then we have a copy too, electronically. You can electronically sign your tax return, e-file forms, that kind of thing. You can most people are very comfortable with getting their refund direct deposited, but you can make your payment electronically, either through the tax return software or online, the IRS website, Alabama website, other states. And so because, we all have had problems with mail.
Yeah.
The IRS sometimes doesn't process mail timely. So just to avoid all that, trying to mail stuff to us trying to mail stuff back to you, we can do a lot of things electronically,
Right.
which would save a lot of time and just give people some peace of mind, because they know that payment was made because I've got this electronic confirmation.
Right. Yeah, all of those electronic options to send information into us we've been using for years and years, but we've really seen an acceleration of those things from 2020, when folks were, we had closed our lobby and people had to either use our mailbox or, hey, do you have a link that I can upload documents to you for? So we've seen a lot more of that stuff.
That's right. And a lot of people don't get physical mail, like paper copies of certain statements. A lot of places encourage you to have electronic emailed statements, or
paperless documents.
Right. Your 1098 for your mortgage interest, I don't think I get a paper copy of mine. I think mine comes electronically. So to avoid you having to print that, and you can save a PDF copy and send it to us. So there are a lot of advantages. But you're right. After the shutdown in 2020, we saw a lot more people get comfortable with the electronic options because we all just had to. Right. And now more people are just used to it. Whereas maybe before they didn't want to take the plunge just because they didn't have to. Well, we were kind of forced into it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, that makes it easier also on the getting some of the documents in. So as you get documents in, you can upload them to your tax preparer.
Sure.
And then you have them kind of on an ongoing basis. That kind of gets us started a little earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is always good, because when the crunch comes, that's when it makes it harder to manage sometimes. And so it's better for everybody just to spread that out a little bit.
So you mentioned we have, we can deliver those tax returns to you electronically. You have an electronic copy in a secure, I'm going to call it a vault. It's a secure account from us.
Right. We have client portals, but a lot of people don't necessarily need that. They don't need permanent storage like that, but we can email documents back and forth securely, so you can, there'll be a verification process. Most people are really used to getting that code on their phone, downloading a document, that kind of thing. It's that process.
Gotcha.
So it's all very secure. And I had a conversation with somebody earlier this year about receiving electronic copies, and he said, I just scan in the paper copies you give me anyway, so electronic would be great. So if you are in that situation, don't feel like you have to do that. We will just send you an electronic copy on the front end, no scanning required.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's a good, that's good to have.
Yeah, it is. And that way, if you need it for bank, like for a finance purpose, for a bank, you've got an electronic copy right there. So that saves some time.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, those are some great tips for getting prepared for tax season. Any other items you want to touch on?
I think that about covers everything I had. But staying organized is probably job one, and that's something you can really do all year. I think you mentioned You've got that folder that you use all year, and that ideally that's the best way to do it. But if you haven't done that for the current year, then get organized as soon as you can, but you can make a plan for next year.
That's right.
To get organized early.
Well, and I guess the other thing is you're the best person to know, hey, I bought a house, sold a house, had a kid, got married, got divorced. Mm-hmm. And if you know those are the kinds of things that we're looking for or need answers to, I mean, it doesn't have to be fancy. You can write it on.
That's right.
You can write it down and put it in, or I changed banks, or any of that stuff that we're going to ask about anyway. You can use the organizer, write it on a piece of paper,
sure,
slide it in.
That's right.
Use the upload forms and all of that stuff, secure document upload. So, I mean, all of those are great options for folks.
Yep. Doesn't have to be fancy.
That's exactly right. And, it doesn't have to be fancy compared to that shoebox that some folks have.
Yeah, that's right. I have seen actual shoeboxes before, so it's not just a cliche. It's real, but, whatever works.
That's right. All right. Well, hopefully we got you prepared for this tax season and probably all tax seasons. This is a good discussion. I appreciate you spending more time with us, really kind of knocking out some things that I think really are timeless. Everybody asks these questions sort of once a year.
That's right.
So hopefully folks will be able to find this useful, this year and others as well. Thanks again, and appreciate everyone following along in your podcast feed or your YouTube feed, and please hit subscribe for us. We'd love to hear from you. If you have other podcast ideas for us, we'd be glad to do that. I think we're sort of aggregating maybe some frequently asked questions from clients. That may be a good way to spend a podcast hour. So subscribe to your YouTube channel or any of your audio podcast channels, and we'll be back to talk to you soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Bye-bye.
Bye.
If you would like us to help your business or would like to suggest additional podcast topics, simply send an email to info@jmf.com.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on YouTube and your favorite audio podcast apps.